same meeting open. Okay, here we go.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, got it.
Good evening, folks, and welcome to the first podcast of 2022. Happy New Year, everyone. I hope you had a great holiday, whatever you celebrate, and I hope that the coming year is kind to you. 2021 was okay. 2022 was not good. Rob, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Kari.
How you doing? You're just getting over COVID.
I am. I got it. So I'm a big winner. Big winner from last year. Closed out the year with COVID. It was awesome.
And but you're feeling better?
I am. So yeah, I had triple back. So, symptoms were pretty mild. I do worry about people who are not vaccinated and get it. It's not fun, even with the vaccine. So yeah, but I'm almost there.
Well, I'm so glad that you're feeling better and that you're okay.
Thank you.
And your family's okay. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
So we're starting off 2022 with a bang.
Or a Bock.
Who do we have? So you did think it was funny.
I did. I loved it.
Who do we have with us tonight, Rob?
That's right, Kara. We have Dennis Bock. Dennis is a Canadian novelist and short story writer. His newest novel, The Good German, was published in September 2020 and has been lauded by Margaret Atwood as a cunning, twisted, compelling tale of deeply unexpected consequences. Okay, I want everybody to buckle in here because I'm gonna give you his awards. He is amazing. Dennis was hailed by the Globe and Mail as Canada's next great novelist. His books include Olympia, The Ash Garden, The Communist Daughter, and Going Home Again, shortlisted for the 2013 Scotiabank Giller Prize and winner of the 2014 Best Foreign Novel Award in China. His books have also been shortlisted for the Amazon Books in Canada First Novel Award, the International IMPAC Dublin Literary Award, the Kiriyama Pacific Rim Prize, the Commonwealth Writers Prize, Regional Best Book, and the City of Toronto Book Award. Can you believe all those?
I can. His books have also been translated into 8 languages in 22 territories.
Holy cow.
Welcome to the show, Dennis.
Yeah, thank you. That sounds what a wonderful introduction. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for coming on the show, and Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you too.
So, as a fellow Canadian, I'd like to say that Canadians are the best writers.
Well, that's an open secret by now, right?
Right.
I think all the best writers we've had on so far have been Canadian. I think that that's just true. It's just universally true. I
agree. And so, Dennis, you're from Ontario.
Yeah, born and bred in Ontario. I live in Toronto. I've lived in Toronto for, I don't know, the last 20 years or something like that. Yeah, it's my home.
But you moved to Spain for a little while.
I lived in Spain for 5 years when I was a younger man. It was kind of like the extension of this writer's fantasy that I had after I graduated university. By then I knew I wanted to be a writer. I had no idea if such a thing was possible. And so in order to explore the world and to, investigate that writer's fantasy that I had forever of moving to a foreign country and trying to write, Madrid was the perfect city to do it in. And so I taught ESL, half the day kind of thing, English as a second language, and then sort of went home in the afternoons and wrote short stories, many of which ended up in my first collection of stories called Olympia. So yeah, it's really interesting, being a writer or being anybody and traveling and living abroad. I mean, it's absolutely terrific experience as a younger person to do that and to immerse yourself in a new culture, in a different culture, learn another language and that sort of thing, and try to put some pressure on your abilities, right? Expand your abilities as much as possible. So that's what I did, and I ended up staying there and making a life for myself for 5 years, and came away with my first book. So it was a terrific time, and I go back to Madrid as much as I can. I have age-old friends there now, friends I made back then, and I'm still in touch with and love deeply 30 years later.
So just out of curiosity, why Madrid? Madrid's gorgeous. I'm all for it. I'm curious, how did you zone in on Madrid?
Yeah, back when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about going to Argentina, but at the time there was some financial chaos going there, and I didn't want to be the rich foreigner because I was going with Canadian currency, and it would have been, everything would have been incredibly cheap for me. But I felt kind of gross doing that, entering into an economy that was deeply troubled and taking advantage of that imbalance. But I did want to go to a Spanish-speaking country, and so I just shifted over to Spain. I'd read all sorts of wonderful novels set in Spain and had been inspired by, those famous American writers and Canadian writers, for that matter, who had spent time in Spain in the 20s and 30s and so on. So it was my next best choice, and it was a terrific choice.
Did you speak Spanish?
I had like hola when I went there. I had no Spanish whatsoever, but I learned it the best way to learn a language, which is in the bars, right? So I met a lot of wonderful people who, as I say, had developed fantastic relationships with. But I'm not a natural language, like I'm not a linguist, right? So I mean, I learned Spanish, but there are some people who immerse themselves in a culture, and they learn the language in 3 months, like brilliantly. And I'm not that guy. So I learned it well, but it took me a while.
That's awesome. How much of where you're at influences what you're writing? So when you were in Madrid, did you just feel like you needed to put every place you saw in there, or
yeah, that's an interesting question. No, I don't think so. All I need in my life as a writer is stability, meaning like I can't be bouncing around. I can't be jumping on a bus and going to another city. So when I was, living in Madrid for those 5 years, most of the stories I was writing, were set here in Toronto, in Canada. In small town Ontario or whatever it was. Most of them, some of them I did, move over to Spain and so on and investigate that. But because, my writer's imagination anyway is very, very deeply hooked into the past, at that time, in memory, at that time, I was writing about my past and my memories as a younger guy, right? Now it's been so long since I actually lived in Madrid. I might tend to write about Madrid now because memory for me is a really powerful filter that allows me to find something of significance, something of literary value in the experiences that I lived, right? So it's that distance is a very interesting way of interacting with your literary imagination, applying an older, wiser perception or interpretation of the events that you recall 10 or 20 or 30 years later. That's why so many writers really love writing about their childhoods, right? Because with that great distance between your older self and your younger self, you can apply some insights, some ability to filter your experiences in a way that might be unavailable to you at the time.
Well, you can view it through an adult lens, essentially.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
Examine it from an adult's point of view, which I think we all do. I mean, to be a writer, you have to be able to dissect things and examine things and find your the core of the truth.
Yeah. I think nostalgia is a very literary quality, actually, that I tap into naturally. I'm a nostalgic person, but I've learned to tap into that emotion in order to help sort of create a texture, an interesting emotional and psychological texture for the work that I do as a writer.
Now, when you say you're a nostalgic person, what was your childhood like? Are you like growing up I grew up in Ontario as well, actually.
Yeah.
I grew up in
I think was, in one way, it was pretty idyllic. I mean, I grew up on the North Shore of Lake Ontario in a sort of quite a pretty little town. I had, I was not aware of any danger. I mean, I was just like a free roaming kid back in the 70s, right? So, I had a house full of brothers and sisters and activity and so on. So in that way, it was, I think, quite a normal childhood. Apart from the fact that, we were German Canadians, we were growing up in a German influenced household. And, you might want to, I'll probably come back to that once we start talking about the good German. But on many levels, my childhood was, it was quite nice. I mean, I was a kind of a solitary kid, I guess, at the time, very, given to reading and writing and that sort of thing, right? The kind of activities that require you to be alone and to become an observer, to practice that quality of being an observer as well as engaging in life. So I was that kid in my family. I was this sort of slightly quieter kid who was, looking at the world as much as I was, participating in the world.
So is there a lot of you and William, or a lot of William and you?
Oh, there's a lot of me and William for sure. So he's, the narrator, the first person narrator of the Good German, is writing from the position of an adult looking back at his early teen years in 1960 in Ontario, in this small town that's quite similar to the town that I remember from my youth. So he does not have a normal childhood, and the reason is because he comes out of German ancestry. His mother is a German immigrant. His father is part German, and so on. And as a second generation German in the world that I write about, he feels a great deal of persecution and prejudice because in my novel, which is an alternate history novel, Germany won the war. And is fascist, like fascism reigns in Europe and is budding in the United States. And so as a consequence, everybody in his community, in his individual actual community, town, and larger larger scope in Canada, resents anything German. And so he constantly is being harassed, and is aware of the fact that he comes out of the bad guys, although he is not a bad guy whatsoever. So he experiences this prejudice from a very early age and wants nothing more than to demonstrate to the community that he lives in that he is actually one of the good guys, that he is not a bad German, the way that people always see him just because of the blood in his veins, right? So the story is very much, that part of the story is very much about prejudice and persecution.
And did you feel that way growing up?
So in my novel, I put a lot of pressure on that because it is an alternate history, and I wanted to go as hard on that idea as possible. What would happen if Germany had won the war, fascism was predominant in Europe, and Canada was this kind of lone holdout. Of course, people would hate Germans. I mean, we can see that in history. I mean, we see, Japanese internment camps in the U.S. and in Canada, right? And then because of suspicion and prejudice and so on, and those camps were dismantled once the Axis powers were defeated. Well, the Axis powers are not defeated in my book, so that prejudice continues and is ramped up, actually. Did I feel that way? I was aware of the fact that German history was very alive and unwell when I was a youngster. When I was, like in grade 1 or 2 or something, I remember people identifying me as that German kid. And talking about gas chambers and a Holocaust. And I didn't know what that was. And I didn't know, I mean, it was so strange for me because I hadn't heard of such things at that time. And yet I was responsible for those things. And so it was a really, quick introduction for me to the world of guilt and conscience. Because I learned very quickly that the heritage that I brought into the 70s as a result of being the child of German immigrants was a very negative one, And so I had to play catch up, try to understand, where that was coming from. But I learned definitely to learn guilt before I learned any responsibility.
Oh, that
I mean,
feels...
as much as, and I, I expect that there's a lot of Muslim kids growing up in America.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely, right. This problem, the themes that I'm dealing with in this novel are very alive today. Exactly like you said, Kari. Muslim kids, now Asian kids because of Delta and Omicron, right? The Asian flu or whatever Trump used to call it, right? I mean, that caused a lot of like actual, dangerous situations for people. So it's just about how the ignorant and undereducated of the low information people will very easily find their next target. Right. I mean, 100 years ago, it was, I don't know, whatever, the Irish,
and the Italians.
It continues to be Jewish people and whatever minority, whatever group you want to find, you can persecute. So, it's just the easiest target. Right. And these days, I think a lot of people are blaming they're focusing on the vaccination almost as that's sort of like receiving the anger, right? It's like people have to blame something. When you're powerless as an individual in society, you look for the easiest way to attain power, and so you say, well, that's why I'm not getting a vaccination, because I am sort of I'm claiming some agency and refusing this, right? So I think that's the same sort of that's a sort of similar expression of people's powerlessness. They have to find some bad guy, whether it's a race or a religion, or in this case, the vaccination.
Well, it's funny you brought up the vaccination, because I was going to save this question for last. But as somebody who obviously had to do extensive research into the Holocaust to write your book, how do you feel about people who compare the vaccine mandates to the rise of Hitler?
Oh my God! I mean, that's like it's ridiculous. It's
right.
It's a non. There's no connection, right? I mean, this is just people just trying desperately to justify their positions, and it's facile, it's absurd, it means nothing,
Yeah. How did you do your research for your book? Because you've written a couple of pretty heavy topics. The Ash Garden was about the fallouts from Hiroshima, the Hiroshima bomb.
Yeah.
And
sorry, go on.
No, you go ahead.
Well, these are two kind of historical novels, and they are actually kind of like they're mirror images of each other. The Ash Garden is about the bombing of Hiroshima. The Good German features the bombing of London as a result of German scientific supremacy, nuclear supremacy, in my book. So they are both set in historical times. That being said, I tend to go quite lightly in terms of my own research. I sort of do the backfilling. Like, what I do mostly is develop my characters and the sort of the personal conflicts that my characters encounter in their lives, and I put them in an historical context, whether it's 1945 or 1960 or whatever it is. And then as I write the characters and I sort of discover their own personal conflicts, I will encounter a question about the historical framework or a moment in history. And then I might, do a little bit of a deep dive to figure out or to read about whatever it is I've just encountered. So I put the historical research in the background. I've been teaching creative writing at the University of Toronto for 15 or something years, and when students approach me with or give me their historical novels, When they're not working, one of the main reasons is because the history is too forward. It's too pushed forward. And, the idea of the novice historical fiction writer is that the more history I can jam in here, the better. I want to convince my reader that I know what I'm doing here, that I'm in control of my subject matter. Well, that's just for me a sign of not of the writer not knowing her characters well enough. I think characterization has to be in the foreground as much as possible. Whether you're writing a story set in 1750, Paris, or 1926, Toronto or Madrid or whatever, it's the characters that are the most interesting always. It's really easy in the age of the internet to load up your book with tons of historical factoids and so on, but really that's not nearly as interesting as developing your characters.
Well, the people who lived through it, exactly. Anybody can pick up a textbook and read about history, but it's about reading about, Jane, who had an experience during the whatever.
Yeah, for sure. And so an historical novel obviously has to engage that time period, right? So you find the conflict that is that's relevant, that's happening in your time period and so on, and you do what you can to extract conflict, to achieve conflict for your characters in that time. So you said a novel around Hiroshima in 1945, obviously you're going to use that conflict to expand your characters and help you, the writer, and help the reader understand something new about that character as they engage in the conflicts that are available to you as a writer writing a time period from 1945, right? But all human conflicts, whether from the 12 BC or 1926, these conflicts are going to be universal, right? They're specifically oriented and coming out of whatever historical event you're dealing with, but people are people, whether 500 years ago or 55 years ago, right? So, you go from the specific to the general, but you really have to start with a specific. You have to know your character. You have to put them up against whatever conflict it is in your time period, and then find what makes that person human, right? Find what makes that person human, and specifically, uniquely your character at the same time.
I never thought I'd laugh at World War II, but have you seen Jojo Rabbit?
I have not. No. Tell me about
it. Have you seen it, Rob?
Yeah. So
good.
Yeah, it's essentially a young boy in Nazi Germany, and he's pulled into the Nazi youth, and you would think a lot of this, and a lot of it is it's definitely a dark comedy, but just seeing it through the eyes of that character at that time, and him struggling with the idea that he's being told all Jews are evil, and then he's confronted with a Jew who's very personable, very real, very visceral, and not an evil. And so I agree, Kari, you laugh through the whole thing.
Because it's Taika Waititi. If you get a chance, Dennis, you should watch it.
I'll check it out.
Because you've written this book.
Right.
Cool. His imaginary friends, here you go, and you'll find out immediately. His imaginary friend is Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
You would think that premise in itself should fail outright, like out of the gate, you'd be like, oh, good God, no. Yeah, but it doesn't, because he's a young child and innocent about all these things. And so, of course, his imaginary Adolf Hitler is innocent as well. And
I see.
And laughable in that regard.
Yeah. Is that a German production, or is it
wasn't it?
It's Taika Waititi, who's
Taika Waititi,
it's Taika Waititi. He's American. Well, he's actually from New Zealand.
Director. So it's in English.
Oh yeah,
it's in English. Yes, it's in English. Yeah. It's got Scarlett Johansson, Sam Rockwell. Yeah, it's quite good.
Cool.
But that lines up exactly with what you're saying. That idea of you go from these specific events, and obviously World War II is going on, and all these things are going around this poor character. but it's how he's dealing with those things.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you were saying. So that's
Yeah.
really good.
Yeah. The book is an alternate history, like I say. And the secondary, or the second parallel narrative, follows the character who turns history, who does what he does, that enables, much to his horror, that enables sort of Germany to win the war, actually. So part of the narrative, half the narrative, follows that story, and so we do understand what went wrong. But really the focus is on, in my mind anyway, is on the first person narrator who lives in the world as that has been created by this moment in time that shifts history, right? So it's kind of, it's my attempt to give the portrait of a family, like of a kind of a working class normal family who has to deal with this global catastrophe. So I mean, there's the person who turns history, Georg Elser, the guy who in reality came 13 minutes away from assassinating Hitler. In my book, he actually succeeds. Those 13 minutes don't occur. He does kill Hitler, but the consequences are just something that he has never foreseen. But I really wanted to investigate in all of my books. In a way, I'm very interested in sort of locating not the average, like regular people in the grip of tremendous historical events, watching those people survive, to try to get by. I mean, I think I kind of am interested in this idea because my parents, they came from Germany in the 50s to Canada as very young people, and they were youngsters during the war. And so when I grew up in the 70s and 80s, their experiences were still very, very much alive for them. And I would listen to their stories, mostly my mother with her stories. And so the war was long gone, was long over, but it continued to resonate in her mind, in her heart. And so she, so I was very aware of my mom and dad as regular people who had been shaped by these historical events. I mean, it's hard to find anybody, in the world who is not shaped by, World War II or whatever, right? Any global catastrophe. And it's like, that's why people are aware, global migration and all sorts of things. And so that's an idea that really intrigues me. How great the great forces of political change, shift our small lives in very profound ways that often we're not even aware of.
Right. We don't see it till much later. Yeah.
And the three of us are pretty lucky because we haven't had a childhood shaped by war. We didn't go to school and learn the drills. I have a friend who grew up in Iran, and he's my age, and he lives here now. He emigrated here. He's a scientist, and he, he's in his 40s, and he's so high anxiety, and it's from a life, it's PTSD from just having a life of living in a place where you have to do drills, where you're hearing bombs, where people are being put in jail for things like having a pet. Us Westerners, we're very spoiled, and we have these, we're almost like in a bubble,
right,
from the rest of the world.
Well, did you not do the duck and cover drills? I'm just
in Canada.
Canada? You didn't? Oh my gosh! So okay, so maybe it's just me, or maybe just where I lived, or because I'm not any older than you are. So, but I remember being like profoundly concerned about nuclear war, like.
That's because you're American.
that's really heavy.
That's an American thing.
I refer to that in my book, and my characters, they had to go through that drill, right? I never did that. I also just Ontario, I do remember in the early 80s when I was in high school, being very aware of the Cold War was still was
Well,
still
Reagan.
underway, right?
Yeah.
Reagan,
Reagan.
and so there was that fear, that kind of like grayness hovering over my life. What I would think about that sort of thing. I don't remember those. We did not do those drills, Roy. Rob.
No.
That's fascinating. Wow.
Just me.
No.
Just me.
No, the worst thing to happen in Canada was you got snowed in.
You got snowed in. I was in Utah. We got snowed in, but it's not
Right.
like
You were
Canada
snowed
snow.
in doing
Not the same.
that's awful.
Well, in Utah, man, you have a whole bunch of missile silos in Utah, I think, right?
I know we had the Air Force Base. I don't know about the missile silos. So maybe that played into it though, because I just remember all of us were like, there was that TV movie that came out, and
I
the
remember
day
that.
after.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
And I remember that we didn't like, that couldn't have been appropriate for kids our age, but because I was like in 6th grade when that came out, and but I remember that's all we talked about.
Right.
Is this, what would you do? And it was just so removed from the play that we had going on in our heads of, like what soldiering really was, and then suddenly you're confronted with these people who are just powerless after a nuclear war, which is the reality. Like there's nothing you can do. Right. So
see, and I was more worried about The Exorcist.
Oh, I love it. I love that that's your concern.
Well, that's a more realistic concern, isn't it?
Right, because that's personal, right?
You don't want to get your head turned around 360, right? You want to stay away from that.
I went to Catholic school. They were like, don't worry about the bomb, worry about your soul. You'd be lucky if a bomb hits. You're going to hell.
Right. That one you're forgiven for, right? Bombs, all right, you're forgiven. But you get mixed up with the devil, you're on your own.
Oh yeah, you go to Catholic school, you don't worry about things like bombs and climate change, and you're too busy worrying about Satan coming for you.
Right. Nice. I love it. Sorry about that.
Insane.
So yeah.
So Dennis, now that you've finished The Good German and it's just come out in 2020, are you working on anything now? Do you go on to another project right away, or do you take a break, or?
No, well, I'm just working on keeping my sanity during Toronto, Ontario's latest lockdown.
Oh, you're in lockdown.
We're in lockdown again, and it's so it's kind of a drag. I mean, I'm doing tons of work. I'm not writing something right now. I'm just up to my eyeballs in reading manuscripts and teaching, which is great. I tend to take a bit of time. I was writing a lot of short stories in the spring, but I tend to take a year or two between novels. I used to, when I was younger, I used to just finish one and start another, like literally the next day. But I always found that, I would write for 60 pages, then go like, I'm not into this, So over the last 2 books, I've made a conscious decision not to rush into the next book, because, if I did, I'd write happily for 50 pages and then go like, I don't care about this, right? So I'm a little more judicious and cautious, I guess, and I kind of play around with an idea, mentally, before I actually start writing.
So tell us about your writing process. Do you just start writing? Do you do outlines? Do you do character sketches?
I just start writing. I don't do any character sketches or outlines. That is. I don't even know how you do that. I think screenwriters do that, and necessarily so, because it's a collaborative process. For me, writing is it's absolutely organic, and one word leads to the next. I don't do any sort of like whatever. I think actually the most interesting part about the creative process is writing into the mystery of what you're writing about, right? It's writing towards discovering your characters and the lives that they live. And any sort of attempt to preordain that or pre-engineer the way your novel's going to go. I've seen nothing but terrible results when novice writers do that. It sort of engineers the energy right out of the book when you go from a scheme or like something pre-engineered. It's really I think it's the worst advice you can get.
So is your advice then for a novice writer to just sit down and write?
We've all heard that, write what you know.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, I think that's really smart advice. I would augment it slightly and say, write what you care about,
mm-hmm.
And write the emotions, and write the sort of like your psychological position that and that you're interested in. When I sit down to write in earnest, I start with a mood or a sort of like an emotional or psychological texture, and a setting and a time period. Mm-hmm. And I can find my character in those three places, right? With a mood, with a setting, and a time period. And that's how I did the Good German. I thought, I thought in the 60s or 70s in Ontario, small town Ontario, melancholy, sort of like a young person struggling to find their place in a community, right? And so I wrote out of those concerns and those ideas, right? I didn't have a plot. I thought, okay, I'm going to write an alternate history. Germany wins the war. That's all I knew. So it's really about it's like a literary excavation. It's like you dig, and the digging is the writing. It's the writing in a direction that surprises you, that frustrates you, that takes you to dead end roads, and you have to sort of back up and try this again, mm-hmm. right? But it really is about a sort of, as Dennis Lee calls it, I think he calls it a notional ignorance. Dennis Lee's a great Canadian children's poet. But I like the idea of notional ignorance, really having no idea what the direction you're going. I think you should start with, and we'll discover more about your character's, state of mind, or the tone that's going to sort of like encapsulate or prevail over your character. Mm-hmm. And that will get you going. That will sort of help you create, that feeling that you need, that voice, right? And then just watch your character sort of like take you in certain directions. I think that's really important.
I like that. I like that idea that you need to discover what the tone is, and then kind of let that inform how your characters are going to develop in the face of that. That's
when you start shoehorning plot into your mm-hmm. character's life, or creating characters because your protagonist needs an antagonist, and so mm-hmm. Here's the bad guy. It's really so apparent, when your reader sits down with your book. So
that I don't want to come off flippant, but I want to say, because I just finished watching the latest season of Cobra Kai, and that's what I felt like they kept
easy
going back to. It's
easy.
Good.
Don't make me
it's
challenge
good.
you to a duel.
It's good. I liked it, but it felt really forced at times, like they were really forcing conflict because they needed to stretch it out for X number of episodes.
They just keep fighting and fighting and fighting. It's the same thing. And you're all grounded. Nobody's going anywhere. Everybody's done karate now.
It's obviously an alternate universe where karate and karate dojos are very, very important to everyone, even if you don't do karate. Yeah, right. But the tone is still there, and I think that's what carries a lot of viewers, because the tone is still there. Yeah. But I do feel that a lot of the plot was forced onto these, we need some kind of conflict in this episode.
Yeah, you need a fight every 4 minutes.
Every episode.
Yeah. We're fighting about the same thing. I'm watching Euphoria right now, which is definitely not a formula.
Yeah.
We'll have to check it out. It's really good. I don't know if you guys would like it, to be honest, actually. Maybe don't. If you do, don't judge me. That's all I can say.
Is that that's the end result, right? Yeah.
I actually watched another great show on, if we're talking about television, Prime, called Wolf Like Me, which was,
I don't know that one.
It was really good. It was surprisingly good, and You should check it out. It was good. If you're there, you go. If you're looking for stuff to
go.
watch. So Dennis, how long? So once you get started, you picked your mood. You picked your. How long does it take you to write your novel?
Yeah, it takes me about 2 years to sort of like wind into it, like to really understand where I'm going, and then, or maybe 2.5 years, and then a quick exit of like 6 to 8 months of like rushing to the end, because it's like that, the first 2.5 years or something is kind of like I'm preparing the ground. It's like I'm doing that literary excavation, right? I'm turning over the soil and so on. And it takes me that long to understand my characters, to understand the trouble that they're in, what they need, what they want, right? And how they're going to solve or try to solve the problems that I've discovered for them. And then it kind of, then it gels, and I go, okay, here now the ending is inevitable. It's surprising, but it's inevitable, right? So I'd say like all told 4 years, something like that, 3.5 years.
And that's including the editing?
Well, I'm a very kind of fastidious writer. I do a ton of editing while I do this.
Oh, okay.
I probably a lot of writers will say don't bother, but I am sort of, I can stay in a paragraph for an hour, sort of like fiddling with it and that kind of thing. So I do a lot of that, and I think I'm a slow writer as a result. I'm 200 years old now. I only have 5 books. So
that's how I feel when I get
that's
done.
like a book every 70
right.
years or something.
Right.
It's terrible. But
go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, but like it's really, I mean, I'm a realist in that sense, and like I just want to write good books, and I don't pump them out. Like I don't show anything to anybody, to my agent, or my editor until I can't do anything more with it, and that takes time, that takes commitment, and you really have to fall in love with your characters. You really have to believe the story you're telling is important and interesting. You have to connect with it, right? It's not about making money. It's not about anything other than writing something that you really believe in, and that takes time. I mean, if you're connected to it, I mean, if you're doing genre stuff, if you're writing sort of teen vampire stories, they're fun and all that, but I don't think the writers are, and I don't want to get into trouble, anybody. Sorry for all those teen vampire writers out there, but I think there's genre writing, which is not easy. You have to learn how to tell a story, and that's I respect that. But then you have a literary novel, which I aspire to write, and that is more a reflection of the writer's deep concerns, and I'm deeply committed to everything I write, and so that takes time.
Do your publisher or your agent ever ride you a little to maybe crank it a little faster?
Crank it up? No, the stakes are pretty low when it comes to a book by Dennis Bock. I mean, if I was Dan Brown, they'd be like, let's see this, man. We have to pay these people,
right?
Because he sells a zillion copies, right?
Right.
No, the people in my corner they know that my kind of writing, comes when it comes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I find the same thing. Like nobody, of course, I'm in the same boat as you, or maybe even a couple tiers below. And they're like, well, if you get a book out, that'd be great.
Yeah, that's right. Let us know.
Yeah.
We'll be here. Yeah,
we're not worried.
That's for sure. Yeah.
Nobody's hanging their mortgage on you. So
that's right. No one's going to starve at the publishing house if they don't get a book by me or yeah, that's right.
Dennis, who do you like currently? Other writers? Who are you reading? Who are you waiting for?
Well, I just started a collection of essays by Bell Hooks called Remembered Rapture. Sometimes when I'm between writing my own novels, I like to read nonfiction, and she's a brilliant essayist and writer. I've been teaching a Michael Crummey novel for a couple of years now. I really like Michael Crummey. He's a fantastic Canadian writer. His latest book came out 2 years ago called The Innocence. I highly recommend that. It's an absolutely brilliant novel. almost as brilliant as the good German, I must
Almost.
say.
I was going to say wow.
Yeah.
Almost.
The best book I've read for me in the last 5 years, written in the first person, is a book called Canada by Richard Ford. It is an absolute mesmerizing, dazzling, brilliant novel that I think if there are any writers out there who want to read somebody who handles the first person like nobody else in the English language, check him out. Richard Ford, a novel called Canada, came out maybe 4 or 5 years, who knows, maybe even more, 4 or 5 years ago. He's actually one of my ongoing favorites. I read and love everything by Richard Ford. Colm Tobin is a wonderful writer. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of fantastic faves. Yeah.
No, those are great. Canada is that's quite a book.
It's brilliant.
He's got one of those great first lines that
that
stick with you, and you're like, oh yeah, this is a book I'm going to keep turning the pages on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's too good, man.
Yeah.
I actually have the book in front of me. The first line is, first I'll tell you about the robbery our parents committed, then about the murders which happened. I'm
like, oh, okay, you're that kind of writer. Okay, I'm gonna hate you forever.
It's really wonderful.
So
it's really
good.
wonderful.
Yeah, I'm in. Yeah. It's like a Pinchon book. You're like, oh, crap, that's a good line.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, nice.
Well, we're almost out of time for today. Dennis, can you tell us where we can find your book?
Online anywhere, right? Amazon and all those usual suspects, and hopefully your local bookstore in Canada. I don't know if it's available in the States. I don't think it is actually. But in Canada, certainly any sort of your local bookstore, independents. Go to the independents if you can, kids.
Mm-hmm.
They need all the help they can get. But if you can't, get it online. That would be great. Writers need all the support we can get these days.
Mm-hmm. And write a review for it. It's definitely worth reading. The Good German is definitely worth reading. And write a review for it. Authors beg for reviews, and we don't care how bad your grammar is.
Yes, sir. That's correct. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Dennis. It's been a wonderful time listening to you and sharing your journey.
Kari and Rob, thank you very much for inviting me.
Absolutely.
And that's all the time we have for today, folks. And shout out to our sponsor, Goodwin's Greenhouse Supply and Service. Grow Goodwin's. And until next time, keep reading.
Thanks, Kari.
Thank you.